and I'm also going to spotlight myself. So I'm going to be the only one that's actually captured on the recording. So if anybody stares and does something or is eating, that's not going to be on that. So, and I'll try to behave myself. So welcome to today's seminar on ethics. This is, I think, the fourth of a periodic program that we're doing on behalf of the District 7620 Training Committee on topics of interest and relevance to Rotarians. We did a program on generational diversity, a program for new presidents, our program on DAC-DB and goal setting, and this is ethics. So we're kind of all over the place, and it really is just a broad spectrum of interest. My name is Chris Zabriskie, and just a little bit about myself before we get started. I'm your district trainer. I'm a 23-year Rotarian, actually 22-year, this past August, 22-year Rotarian with the Rotary Club of Charles County in Southern Maryland. I've been, like I said, in Rotary for 22 years, but I've been in three clubs, one in Northern Virginia, one in Ankara, Turkey. And I've served on the district staff as a youth exchange outbound chair and district training committee for a number of years now. So prior to that, I've been in the military 24 years in the Air Force and now work for a training company. And interestingly enough, we do a lot of virtual training every day. And I don't do the training. I kind of manage the back end, but for Rotary, I'll get in front of the camera. So that's a little bit about this. And I wanted to start with a quick discussion about what are ethics. And to do this, I'm going to introduce a tool called Mentimeter. And I started mentioning this. If you know how to use it, you already know how to use it. You can get started. If you don't know how to use it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you several ways of answering this question. And I think based on the conversations I was having with some of the people in the audience, you're already very, very familiar. You may be more familiar than I am with this topic. So what are ethics? One way you can join the Mentimeter is take out your phone. Take out your phone, turn on the camera, scan that QR code. And what will happen is a question is going to show up, or you can take out your phone or a website or go to www.menti.com. It's MENTI.com. And then type in that code that you see at the top of the page, the 82371885. And finally, I also put a link in the chat and you can click on that. That's going to open another web browser for you where you'll see a question. And on that web browser, I'll just click it again. When you click on that web browser, what's going to happen is a question is going to open up and it's going to say, what are ethics? And you just type in the answer and hit submit. And go ahead and give that a try. If you have questions, if it's not working for you, unmute and ask me. If you want to type in the chat, you can type in the chat too. And so it's just waiting for responses here. So what should happen is when you type a response in, it'll show up right there on the screen. And I'm seeing some thumbs ups, but nobody's typing an answer here. So
Chris, Jim Dolezal here. I'd like to welcome B. Carson from the Annapolis Club. She's joined us, and I see she's muted, and I don't know if she's on video or not.
I'm here.
She's here, and I see Wanda's joined us, and Mimi's got on her computer. That's great. So,
sorry, Chris, I'm typing.
Hi, everybody.
Typing doesn't seem to put any answer in. I mean, clicking on the little up thumb is one thing, but I don't have my phone, but I've typed in the code and everything.
But apparently you have to install it.
No, it should, let me, I'll show you real quick.
I have the page. It says what are ethics, responses with votes, responses without votes, but where to type in my answer? It doesn't say continue or anything.
But at the very bottom, it says open.
Not on mine.
You know what? Sorry, I hastily added this slide here. Let's just type in the chat or yeah, exactly, John. I was afraid it might have done that and clicked the wrong question type. It should have been an open-ended question. But In any case, just type in the chat or unmute. Say, what are ethics? Said John, a system for protecting rights and welfare of those affected by plan or action. Broad description. Anybody else want to venture a suggestion about what are ethics? And there's a certain distinction I want to make specific. And I did say, and earlier in it, and for those who just joined, this is really going to be an overview of ethics top level. It's not a college seminar. It's not going to be super in depth, and the topic certainly warrants more time. But let me get to my next slide here, where I want to get with this. Set of guidelines to govern a person's behavior. Thank you, B. That's the word I was going for there. And I really was getting to acceptable behavior because we talk about morals, we talk about ethics, and they're similar in a lot of ways. And thank you, Charlotte. That's another good point about here, fairness, because we talk about morality, doing the right thing, and there's a certain behavior based on higher power, doing the right thing in that sense. But when you talk about ethics, it's still behavior. We're talking about governing behavior, and it's based on decisions that a group reflects agreements made by the group with regards to acceptable behavior. And so we're in society. There are acceptable behaviors in society, and as Rotarians, we have acceptable behaviors within Rotary. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the context of where Rotary's origins and implications to ethics came from along the 218 years of Rotary. And I do like John mentioned the four-way test. We are going to talk about the four-way test today, but this is not going to be a course that's dedicated to the four-way test because there is so much more about Rotary's long history with ethics. And this is going to be a brief history of Rotary's long history with ethics. And I'm going to go through 115 years of ethics, and it's probably going to be about the next 10 to 15 minutes where we're going to go through really we're talking guiding principles. And you can see here from Rotary's origins in 1905, how certain elements of Rotary has really kind of always tied back to that origin of being a business networking and fellowship society. But the key there is business. And a lot of this always ties back to professionalism. Inherent with professionalism is doing the right thing, being in the right, being fair, and doing good business. Because ultimately, Rotary was an organization that you wanted to have people who can do business with each other. And if you can't trust each other, or if you had unethical people around you, you wouldn't want to do business with each other. So we wanted to make sure that all Rotarians were doing business in the right way. So looking through the motto. So one of the guiding principles is the motto. Everybody knows service above self is a motto we're familiar with. But that wasn't the original motto of Rotary. There was in 1911, when Rotary was founded in 1905, the first international convention, they proposed a motto. He profits most who serves his fellows best. And they modified that eventually to he profits most who serves best. But also service, not self, was introduced in also 1911. So this is the early years of Rotary, where we're talking about selflessness and doing what's best for the organization and for the society. But I'm going to ask another Mentimeter question here, and I hope this one works better than the last one. Now, this should have advanced on your device, and what it should look like, and if you click on the link, here, I'll put this on the screen here, should be a field like this, where you can type your answer and then click on submit. I don't know why the first one didn't have that on there. So here's the question to answer is, how is service above self different from the earlier motto? And for those, because I took the slide down, the earlier motto was, he profits most who serves best. And if Mentimeter is too hard or it's not working, just type in the chat and I'll take a look at that as well and read that out. And I'm also going to type the Mentimeter link again.
You go back to the QR code, please.
Oh, sure. And you can just type that link. I click the link I put in the chat and a window will open on your computer. And that's another way. Okay. Service comes before self. Okay. And you can put multiple answers in here if you want to. Focus on business goals. Yeah, the earlier one uses the notion of personal gain and adds the notion of service. So yes. So exactly. So thank you for those responses. And keep typing them in as I'm talking. I'm just going to kind of wrap it up here. The earlier Rotary was really focused on business, but even from the earlier days, because both were introduced, both the origin of both were introduced in 1911, there was always that understanding of selflessness, service above self, and Rotary has moved steadily a little bit away from the actual profiteering. Did you know, this may be a little known fact to some, but in the first, I think it was 10 years or 5 years of Rotary, there was actually an officer position in Rotary clubs called the statistician. And that statistician was responsible for keeping track of business referrals that members gave to one another. And so in the early couple of years, Rotary really was a business development networking organization for that business. There was still, even from the earlier days, and we'll talk about the code here of the object of 1906, how it really originated. But it really, the focus was on business, and then it's moved towards service steadily. And getting back to the slides, thank you for all your um, inputs. Uh, Back in 1989, the Council on Legislation established service above self as the principal motto. Other mottos still out there, and it's still a motto, but the wording in 1989 was the principal motto. So that's why we say that and see that on all our documents. So talking about the origins of Rotary in 1906, this was what the object of Rotary is. So we talked about the motto, and the motto is one of the guiding principles of Rotary, service above self. And we're going to get back to that later. But the object of Rotary. Now, the object of Rotary is something that if you haven't seen it in a while, you may have heard about it in an RLI class. It's always in the Rotarian magazine. So if you look at the Rotarian magazine, I don't know what page it's on, but it's fairly early on, and there's a listing that says the object of Rotary in there. Now, this isn't the object of Rotary. This is the object of the Rotary Club of Chicago from 1906. It's pretty much the earliest. And you see again what we talked about earlier. It's the promotion of business interests of its members was the first and foremost point of there. And there's promotion of good fellowship is in there because your fellowship was important. And if you look at the third object of the Rotary Club of Chicago in 1906, spread the spirit of civic pride and loyalty among its citizens. So you can kind of read into that community service oriented. They did build a privy as a service project for the people of Chicago. So that's the main focus there. Now, the object of Rotary evolved, and we already talked about how in 1911 they were talking about the motto "Service above self" or "Service not self." In 1910, the object of Rotary was formally established, to include 5 points, and these were the 5 points. And so you can see there's already a big shift. Organize new clubs, provide common good for all clubs, civic pride and loyalty, honorable business methods, and advance the business interest. But it's still business oriented here. And then it evolves a little bit more in 1915. And you can see the first four are the same. Now it adds two more. And what do you notice about 5 and 6 here? Anybody want to unmute and speak or type in the chat? I made them bold for a reason. At this point, so in 1915, Rotary, the International Rotary has made that big shift from being primarily a business-oriented organization to serving humanity here too. So you see in 5 and 6, there is a quicken the interest of each member in the public welfare of his community and cooperate with others in civic and social, commercial, industrial development. There's still a business tie-in. Stimulate the desire for each member to be a service to his fellow man and society in general. So that has really kind of taken the forefront there in 1915. And what happened between 1915 is that there are lots more tweaks to this. It goes back to 4. In 1918, they made an adjustment. 1927, they made an adjustment. 1935, they made an adjustment. And finally, in 1951, they created the object of Rotary. And this is pretty much how it is today. I don't think it's any different, but you can see this is what, if you open the Rotarian magazine, you will be reading about today. So, and you can see it's distinctly different, but you can see the origins in there. Ethical standards are in there, they're important, but they're all alongside service and fellowship. And let's see. And
Chris, it's really interesting, if I could just make a comment.
Sure,
that
please.
the big focus on ethics was really, again, post World War II, and the formation of the definition of human rights in the World Health Organization and the UN. So it looks like it's like Rotary actually predated some of this stuff.
Well,
But
it's
much like
interesting.
religions did, you know.
It's interesting you mentioned the United Nations, because the Rotary had a direct involvement in the creation of the United Nations. I mean, that was they were there at the table. As a matter of fact, it was the London Rotary Club that brought the parties together to start talking about if the formation of the United Nations and the charter. So that's why Rotary has a seat in New York at the United Nations. But you're absolutely right. So United Nations was following Rotary's sense of ethics, and it was an involvement. I mean, it wasn't just World War II. You'll go back to the four-way test, which we'll get to in a minute here, that dates back to 1932 and earlier. And one of the key phrases in here, we talk about the ideal of service. You see that right in the first line. The ideal of service is the key phrase in the object of Rotary. It's the ideal is an attitude of being thoughtful and helpful person in one's endeavors. And that's what the object of Rotary truly means. It's really the ideal of service. And that's why you see service of self, and that it's in a common thread here in the object of Rotary. And we're going to come back to the ideal of service later on. And I have some examples of ethical tests that we'll be looking at. Now, I don't expect you to read this. But when we talk about a code of ethics, we've actually had a code of ethics. We had a code of ethics that dated back to 1915. And this is it. And it was long, and 11 articles, and it had a lot to do with business standards. And I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in here. It's a rule book on how to do business. And remember, in the days in 1912, when Glenn Meade first he succeeded Paul Harris as the first president of Rotary, or the second president of Rotary International. He introduced this, and it was at a time when there wasn't a lot of governance in business and society. It was let the buyer beware, the survival of the fittest, caveat emptor. That's let the buyer beware. And since the adoption of the Rotary Code of Ethics, at least 145 national industrial codes of ethics have been adopted by other organizations uh, based on the influence of Rotarians. And so, let's see, this evolved here. This is what somebody might have looked at and handed out in a club. I think they were required to give this to new members uh, back in the day. And then we have and we'll talk a little bit more about that, the Rotarian Code of Ethics. You see, it was deleted in 1980. And it really, I mean, it's not that we don't have a code of ethics, but we've kind of had the unofficial code of ethics here, the four-way test. And it's interesting, and I have a long history of the four-way test that I'm not going to read to you all, and you may have seen it. It's technically not a code. It was never designated as a code of ethics, kind of like a guiding principle. It's certainly what most Rotarians will consider a code, and the Rotary is kind of called it a code as well, but it's just never been formally considered a code. And it's simple, and it's nice that most Rotarians have it memorized because many clubs will say it all the time, and it's something that you can really use as an ethical test to say, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill, better friendships, or will it be beneficial to all concerned? Simple, easy, and it's a test. And we're going to talk a little bit more about ethical tests here in a minute and their usefulness of it. But before, we want to go back to that long history of ethics. So the object of vocational service. This is something, and I'll say I'm not an expert on Rotary history. I did my share of research for this, and I found that there was an object of vocational service that was inserted in 1940, and I'm not exactly sure where this fits in with the object of Rotary. It didn't supplant the object of Rotary that was written at this time. It was, or being evolved at this time, the one that kept getting updated. But there is this object of vocational service that kind of harkens back to that 1906. These are business, we're business people as Rotarians. I describe business men and women, professionals, community leaders, and people interested in supporting the community as my 30-second spiel when I describe Rotarians, but it does start with businessmen and women, because those are our roots. And in 1940, these were things. We're talking about high ethical standards in business and professionals, the worthiness of all occupations, and dignify each Rotarian by his occupation. So we tie that back. And then if you compare that to the 1906 roots of Rotary, what are some similarities? What are some differences? And what's the big difference here between what Rotary was looking at when they were just the Rotary Club of Chicago and Rotary International in 1940? And you can unmute and talk or type in the chat.
In 1940, it was global. I mean, it was implied to be global, right?
Yeah. Well, Rotary was global, yeah, but you look at these ethical standards, so it really makes much more of a distinction about ethical standards. You look at 1940, encourage and foster high ethical standards in business and professions was first and foremost, whereas promotion of the business interests of its members was the first tenet in 1906. So you really have that outward-looking service above self attitude. You talk about the fellowship, the worthiness of all occupations, and then the advancement of the best interests of Chicago. Obviously, this is the club's object that then evolved into really dignifying each Rotarian. So now jump ahead to 1989. Again, I'm not expecting you to read this whole slide, but I will point out something. So this is the first big shift in any of the Rotary's guiding principles since 1951. So 1951, they came up with the object of Rotary. That's pretty much how it stands today. And then we have the Declaration of Rotarians in Business and Professions. Does anybody remember what else happened right around 1989 in Rotary? Do you remember when Rotary admitted women right around 1987, 89. There was right in that time frame, they were going through that whole um, reckoning in terms of, okay, this is a big shift in the organization. It just came to my mind right now, but for some reason there was an impetus to uh, come up with we would say a code of conduct, and um, this is, and I'm reading ahead here. This isn't really a code of conduct here, the Declaration of Rotarians, Business and Professions, but there's an expectation of behavior here, which really does imply it's a code of conduct. And um, this is something here that really harkens back to business ethics. You see, there's ethical codes in my vocation, highest ethical standards, be fair to my employer, employees, etc., adhere to honesty, neither seek nor grant fellow Rotarians privilege or advantage. And what this evolved to is when that is a document that was expected to be given to every Rotarian when they joined. And now it evolved to the Rotarian Code of Conduct, which is relatively recent. I mean, most of us, many of us, will have joined Rotary prior to 2014, and that's when the Rotary International introduced a code of conduct and had these four behaviors. And again, number one is act with integrity and high ethical standards in my personal professional life. So really, we're putting the real ethical standards at the foremost. Deal fairly with others. Then we get into a little bit more of the service and avoid behavior that reflects adversely on Rotary and other Rotarians, which that's again unethical behavior would reflect adversely. So you're really kind of hitting ethics and ethical behavior from multiple perspectives. They made an amendment in 2019. This is relatively recent. Charlotte, I see your question. When did Rotary finally permit women to become members? There's a very interesting story that dates back to 1987 when the Rotary Club of Duarte, California, made a woman a Rotary Club member, and they went all the way up to the Supreme Court. But in 1989 is when Rotary International finally changed its rules to admit women. So anyway, the Rotary Code of Conduct in 2019 added another statement here. Now, if you're adhering to statement number 4, I think it kind of goes without saying, but given the time, it didn't go without saying. So they wanted to make sure there was no doubt in the Rotarian Code of Conduct that Rotary clubs and Rotarians are responsible for harassment-free meeting, events, etc. And so I just want to point that out there. That's really kind of ancillary to ethics. I think just if you're being ethical, you're probably also adhering to that. But in any case, that's the current standing of what the Rotary Code of Conduct. So now, so what? Now here's the so what. Now we talked for the last 15 minutes about different aspects. We talked about the motto, the object of Rotary, the four-way test, the Rotarian Code of Conduct, and many other things that have kind of come in between, come and gone on ethics. Now, I'm going to ask you another Mentimeter question here in a second. So if you're still logged in, go ahead and go back. I'm going to skip a couple here. Of the guiding principles that we discussed, which is the most meaningful to you? And so just you can go to the next slide. Just pick one of them and see which is the one that kind of gives you the most meaning. And I probably should have hid these. Let me hide them until everybody gets a chance to vote. And I'll take a look and see. And let me put that link in the chat one more time. So if you just want to click on the link that I put in the chat, you'll get the question up on your screen, and then you can vote, and then you can minimize that window. and we'll see what people think, and then we could talk a little bit about the different guiding principles. And these guiding principles can get confusing because there are so many of them, really. Thank you, John. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to unhide, show the results. So, yeah. Okay. The four-way test, service above self, and really they're simple, but they're straightforward, and they're easy to understand, and they say it all. I mean, really, it is about serving others and living yourself by the, is it fair to all concerned? Is it the truth? And those ethical values. So, good. So why are ethics important? And let me see. Okay, I got one more. Why are ethics important? So you can go onto the Mentimeter, should still be open, and just type, if you want to type in chat, I can copy it over and put it on the board too. But we've talked about ethics. We've talked about what Rotary says about high ethical standards, and why does it matter? And yes, it's kind of a softball question to this crowd, but I want to get a couple of perspectives. And if you want to talk and say, World Compass. You actually have to click the submit button, not just hit enter here, in case anybody's wondering. So good. We got a couple of responses here. So yeah, ethical behavior is crucial to building trust and fairness in your fellowship and joint action or base or moral compass. You can do so much more when you know the people around you. You can trust them. I'm not saying if you do business with other Rotarians, you don't need a contract, but you know pretty much what they say is going to be held to be true. And I wanted to talk about some tests. And the four-way test is an ethical test. It asks you some questions, but there are other tests, other ethical tests that you can do by observation. And here's an example of one. It's called the shopping cart test. And so you can read what it says there. I'll read it as well. So it says you observe something arriving at a grocery store. If they go out of their way to return a shopping cart from the parking lot to the store, they're a good person. I say good person, just, it doesn't say about the whole person, but it says something about that person. It's a test because that task takes very little effort, but it does take some effort. And it's someone else's job. So it's not the person's job to do. And it helps the greater society because that shopping cart could be a hazard to other vehicles. It could be just an inconvenience to have somebody else go there. And so what this test does is by observing a person's behavior, you're able to indicate whether that person is doing it a service above their own interest, because otherwise they might just walk into the grocery store. And so, I mean, does that make sense to everybody? Do you agree that people who go out of their way selflessly when they don't need to, it's not like it's the Aldi necessarily where they might be getting a quarter if they find a shopping cart. That could be a whole different incentive. I'm talking about places where you don't get a quarter for turning in your shopping cart. So that's, I guess, a bad picture because those are quarter slots. So I was planning on going to breakout room, but since there are only like 6 of us in here, 7, let's just stay in the meeting room here. And let's talk about other examples. And I have several, but I was going to take 5 minutes and ask if anybody wanted to suggest other ethical tests. I'll even put the slide up here. Let's say, what are some other ways that you can kind of assess whether somebody is being ethical or not.
One that occurs to me is seeking out and listening for the opinions and perspectives of others and respecting that opinion. That's maybe a little more subtle, but it certainly has to do with club membership and club operations and so on. So it's a little closer to Rotary than it might be to a shopping cart.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's one way of doing it. I was thinking of things more that are more observable. Um, just in society. Think about if you're in an office building or if you're at the library or on a bus. What are some things that people might do that, I mean, we talk about Rotary being service above self, and that means I might take my Saturday to do something for the community instead of uh, you know, sitting home and watching the game. Uh, but in little small bits and efforts in our daily lives, what are some other things? Um, for example, let's see, should I call on somebody? Yes.
And how about let someone go before you, holding the door open? Somebody drops something, you bend over and pick it up for them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's common courtesy to do that. You don't have to. I mean, I don't know. I tell my kids they have to. But that's because they're raised right. But certainly it is. It's going out of your way when it's something that uh, is not required of you. Um, Maybe you have your hand up. You're muted.
Yes, I think that there are some cultural issues and there are changes that occur in societies also. And what I'm thinking of right now is a man who recently, we were in a group, a conversation group, and he said that he tried to open a door for a young woman and she chastised him and told him that he was being disrespectful. So there are things that may be more acceptable in certain groups, or if you want, even generational issues that are not necessarily applicable or satisfactory across the generations or across cultures.
It's good that you bring that up because I have heard that before. And that might be a little bit of an extreme case, but I would still say going out of your way um, to do something kind. And the whole man holding a door for a woman has become a little bit of a, okay, now I'm just being a misogynist because I don't think you can hold the door yourself. That's not quite really right. I hold doors for people all the time going in and out of the Panera when they're carrying coffee. And whether they're a man or a woman, it's not because of their
Right.
gender, it's because it's convenient for them. And if I have a free hand, I'm certainly going to help.
Chris,
So,
that is a good point, but it begs the question, is there a difference between kindness and compassion and ethical behavior?
well, that's a good point. One of the points I was going to bring up is what are some things you can do when maybe nobody else is watching? And maybe it matters more. So maybe not directly to another person, but let's take a look at some of these other ones that I came up with. Um, here's one, a library book test. So you observe somebody in the library. So you're observing, but they're not necessarily doing it because you're watching them. And there's a misplaced book on a table or chair, or it takes time to put it back where it belongs or put it back on the tray. I mean, I know some librarians probably don't want you putting stuff back on the stacks out of order, but at least putting it on a table to be where it's supposed to go. And it shows respect for shared resources and for the community spaces. So that's something that nobody's going to yell at you because you put a book back unless they were still using it. But we're just going to assume it was just left there on a table or chair. There's the recycling. The recycling is this can even be I pick up a piece of trash in the parking lot when nobody else is watching because it wasn't my trash. It's a can or it's a a paper bag or something that happens to be out there, and I'll go out of my way, even if going out of my way is only bending down a couple of feet, grabbing it, and then throwing it in the trash can uh, because it betters society. And it really what you're getting back to in any of these tests is service above self, because I actually have to bend down, pick up trash, and put it in the receptacle rather than just walking by it. And as small as that might be, they add up. You know, the elevator hold test, and that might be a little bit more similar to holding the door for somebody. You notice somebody holding the elevator for a person to see them coming, maybe if they're down the hall, because now I'm going to delay my own arrival because I'm holding the door for a minute, but I know somebody is trying to catch the elevator. Maybe they're in a hurry, or maybe they, um, just need to be someplace, and you don't want them to have to wait a long time for the next elevator to come. So those are some. Um, Now I have three more. Does anybody want to maybe suggest any others after having seen some of these?
Chris,
Sure.
sometime back, I took for a year, I decided to have a daily practice, at least if I was driving the car, of, because I used to be very stressed when I was working. When I retired, I was getting, how I was relieved of a lot of stress. So every day I had to let somebody go in front of me, enter, in a case where I didn't have to let them enter, it just, and eventually it turned out that when people did stick their car's nose in, when I wasn't thinking or had already kind of done my good duty for the day, I wasn't mad. It didn't matter, this was okay. Chalk it up to another one. I did two today. And, it's kind of silly, but it became a little test of my patience and compassion.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's exactly where I'm going to go with this in a couple more slides, because it's a small thing, but it really does epitomize service above self, even if it is because you're helping the traffic flow and you're helping other people, when you could have just kind of kept your car going and taken that spot. Here are three more. The public transportation seat test. I mean, that's the classic. Do you give up your seat for somebody who might be more needy of it? I mean, that's also common courtesy matters. The office kitchen. You have an office kitchen. Somebody leaves the counter a mess, water on the counter. It's not your job to clean it up, but you just grab some paper towels and clean it up and start cleaning stuff up, make it better for everybody. Even though language sensitivity test, again, that's just another one to show common courtesy, to really show service. It's a little less of a service. I got some help with AI for some of these things to come up with. So that one maybe a little less so. So now getting to the point, why is this important? And I'll throw another one of these up here just to kind of see why is it important to assess. And we already touched on this a little bit. But put it in the context of Rotary. Why is it important for us as Rotarians to be able to recognize people with good ethical behavior?
Would you say that it's because when you notice, it allows you to know if they're a good fit for Rotary?
Exactly, because this is one way that you can recognize people who may be good potential members for your club. And if you see people out there who are exhibiting service above self, and sometimes when we talk about projects, if Maybe was that you?
Uh,
Did you raise your, or no,
yes,
you got your
but
hand up.
I was going in another direction. Please continue, and I'll
Yeah,
add my little piece later.
okay. Um, yeah, so recognizing people, but also, showing people, I mean, recognizing, giving yourself some standards to remind yourself how to do service. This is a way you can kind of just judge yourself. Say, okay, maybe tomorrow I'm going to be in the coffee shop and I see some trash down there, and I said, well, we just talked about ethics. I'm an ethical person. I'm a good Rotarian, and sure, I'm going to take 10 seconds out of my day and make the world a better place in a small way. And this is the way we can epitomize service above self in our everyday life, and it does grow, and it's with practice. This is the way we can, they say practice ethics, but you can really can practice good ethical behavior that I think like Charlotte was saying, when you get good at it, you don't get stressed out about other people who don't do it, and it becomes something that is more endemic to the way you behave in general. Mimi, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I was looking at it, more as a personal discipline. It's almost like, well, it touches a little bit on a spiritual discipline, something that one does for oneself.
Right.
And to keep, because our goal in life is to get better, every day, do things better. But the question that I have about the judgment aspect of it, of others, because to see who is, sometimes maybe we may be a bit self-righteous. And all of us, I think, in our, not conversations, in our encounters with colleagues and others, we may find that there are certain things that they do that we think are not ethical. And in terms of, as I get older, I try to judge less and to concentrate more on what maybe I should be doing myself. But one thing that I'd like to add, though, is that I think that there is a responsibility toward the people who are very close to us, like our children, our mentees, young children, to inspire them to develop higher and higher ethical behavior, rather than putting the standards and seeing who else out there measures up to this.
Exactly. And so the points that I came up with for this slide, finding ethical members for, joining your club, but also in encouraging ethical behavior, like I described, is just a reminder that these are some of the standards you can do to manage one's own behavior and preserve Rotary's reputation. Because if you have a lot of people who are, no kidding, genuinely doing the service above self, that's going to rub off. People are going to recognize it, and it's going to help their reputation. And I was going to say earlier, a lot of times when we talk about things like doing a service project on a Saturday instead of staying home and watching a ball game, we will consider that service above self. But it's also open to the, am I doing this because I'm going to get an award or meet a standard, or be a great photo op for self-promotion, or am I giving a lot of money to something that's going to cause me sacrifice, but maybe I'm also running for office, or I want to get a recognition. For a lot of the stuff that we do in Rotary in terms of service, we are being recognized. Just look at the whole Paul Harris fellow. We get a pin for it. That's nice. Sure, not worth $1,000 worth of pin, but still, there is that reason for doing it. And so when we're really talking about truly ethical behavior and true service above self, it's something that maybe nobody even notices. You just do because it is selfless, truly selfless. And we're talking about little examples here, like picking up trash. But it, goes into you pay all your taxes, et cetera. Follow the laws and follow the compliance and all that stuff. John, you have your hand up.
Chris, some of the principles you raised, one has to do with respect for others. You listen to them or you invite them, you respect. The second one is don't do any harm or benefit them if you can. And
Yep.
third is distributive justice. In other words, who benefits? Are you leaving somebody out for what other reason? These are great principles. And the question I ask is how could we apply this to the preparation of global grants? And are these same principles applicable to our work domestically and internationally?
Well, and with that, I'll say there are a lot more dimensions of ethics. And I did have one, additional slide here. This is really my wrap up here to say that there are a lot of ethical dilemmas out there. And, if we want to spend 4 or 5 minutes talking about one of these here, I'd be happy to do it. They can't necessarily all be judged by the ethical tests that I introduced. I mean, I was really looking at the bare bones to show service above self. You may try to also apply the 4-way test to some of these, and they're dilemmas because sometimes there aren't good answers for it, and so the whole topic of ethics is a lot more complex than can ever be discussed in a 1-hour seminar. So I don't know, does anybody want to talk about one of these? Maybe the first one, if we're talking about grants, how that could be evaluated, resolved. There's a 20-page paper on that for a college grad student, maybe. And honestly, I really do. I did not put these up here with the intent of going through them. I kind of threw them up there as to say that there are dilemmas that can't easily be solved by Rotary's ethical tests because there are right answers on both sides. Corrupt government agency to a more efficient but still somewhat corrupt non-government organization. Is it ethical to support the lesser evil for a greater good of the community? There aren't clear answers for these, one way or the other. There are a number of other ethical tests, the greater good test, and I remember that from college, and some of you who are professional ethicists or spend more time on commissions, et cetera, may have some other ideas. But for what Rotarians do, we really are focusing on that whole service of self, doing the right thing. We talked about some of the guidelines here, and I think I'm going to go to one more slide here and kind of wrap up because we're almost at the top of the hour here. But really, just to kind of summarize what we talked about, we talked about what is ethics. We talked about its behavior that conforms with the standard accepted norms of society, Rotary, et cetera. We talked about Rotary's guiding principles, and there are many of them, from motto to 4-way test, object of Rotary to code of conduct, and it's evolved, but it still harkens back to our origins. I mean, I always said the vocational service avenue of service, or we call it lane of service now, is one of my favorite because, and I joined Rotary as a military person, whether that was a vocation or not, not the typical profession of a Rotary Club member, but still there's a lot of professionalism in Rotary that it does go back to our origins or roots. We talked about why ethics are important to Rotarians because it's our reputation. And we talk about service a lot, but we don't necessarily talk about ethics and our vocation and professionalism quite as much. And we talked a little bit about how we can use those tests to judge. There's a lot to be talked about here for a future session. And I'll leave the recording on in case anybody has any questions or final comments. We're turning it off.
Chris, does the district or Rotary in general have a kind of an ethical consulting group that people can go to and say, what's your thoughts on this, whether it's support for LGBT community, or support for women's health, or support for working with minorities, that may be not the current interest of the current government, whether it's India, Uganda, or the U.S.
That's a great question. Not to my knowledge. I think you can always go to the district governor and ask for that opinion if you want the voice of the district. There is a I call it district attorney, not that kind of district attorney, but there's a district council that can help you with legal issues, and often they're intertwined. But not to my knowledge. That would be a great suggestion to create. Maybe our district would be the first. I'm going to turn the recording off here, just be able to answer any additional questions.